Hello there, everybody. Welcome to this special online event where Hort Innovation will be launching the Horticulture Statistics Handbook 2019-2020 edition. The HortStats Handbook is the preferred and leading resource for horticulture statistics, and the launch of the 2019-20 edition marks the 6th annual publication for the handbook. So this is a really exciting time of the year where we're able to refresh and realign our understanding of the horticulture sector's performance over the last 12 months. So thanks for joining, and I can assure you that the next hour will be time well spent in your day. My name is Adam Briggs, and I'm the head of the Data and Insights team at Hort Innovation. And the Data and Insights team manage the delivery of the handbook with the support of the specialist food market researchers and analysts, Fresh Logic. So today, this webinar will consist of 3 parts. So the first part will provide an overview of the origins of the handbook resource, the methodology and approach. The second part will provide a deep dive into the data and the associated insights that were recorded for the 2019-20 year, as well as some broader trend analysis. And for the final part of the session, we'll draw on a diverse industry panel to explore how the handbook's being utilised across a range of different situations and requirements. And then we're looking to round out the session with a Q&A session with you, the audience. So there's plenty to get into today, but before we go any further, we'll just go briefly to Martin, Kneebone and Brendan, who are on the screen at the moment, just to provide a quick introduction. So maybe I'll start with you, Martin.
Morning, Adam, and thanks for that. Yep, I'm Martin Kneebone. I'm Managing Director of Fresh Logic, and this morning I'll be helping you understand how we do what we do and how much we've enjoyed it for the last 6 years.
Great, thanks, Martin. And Brendan, just a quick intro, please.
Yeah, Brendan O'Keefe from the Data and Insights team. So I manage a lot of the industry analysis projects that we do here at Hort, and HortStats is really the flagship of them. And this has been my first year managing that and working with Martin and the team at Fresh Logic. Excellent, thanks, Brendan.
So yeah, we'll get into the first part of this session now, where we're just going to take a bit of an overview around the methodology and the approach to producing the handbook. And as I mentioned before, this year marks the 6th publication of the handbook, which is a really good sign of the value that the resource provides. And Hort Innovation originally invested in the handbook to plug a bit of a gap in the provision of reliable and trusted statistics, the level of detail needed for the sector. And in particular, we've been able to, through the handbook, we've been able to reconcile a range of disjointed and incomplete information, particularly also challenged by the diversity of the sector. And from that, we've been able to seize an opportunity to represent the sector collectively. And finally, through the ongoing delivery, we've established some really good trends over time, which helps demonstrate leadership in the sector as well. So part of the underpinning success for the handbook is the unique method and approach that's taken to compile and publish the information. So as mentioned before, we've been working closely with Martin and his team at Fresh Logic in producing the handbook. And I'd like to draw Martin into the discussion now, just to learn a little bit more about the approach that we take for the handbook. So maybe Martin, we'll just start off, if you could maybe just tell the audience a little bit about the method that you adopt and the key data sources and engagement approach in terms of pulling that handbook together.
Sure, thanks, Adam. I mean, essentially what we've got is a short life perishable product with many touch points, an array of distribution channels, and in this particular market, many suppliers and many, well, not many, but 3 or 4 main pathways to market. So there's a net, I suppose there's an essential need to throw a net over all of that. And you can throw a net over what is quite a wide and complicated set of data, but you must have, in our view, a methodology that adds it all up. Otherwise you end up with a whole lot of speculation. And that's essentially what we designed 6 or 7 years ago. I can remember those discussions where we were I suppose portraying that capacity, and that really without the capacity to add it all up, it wasn't going to work. Now that means consulting a wide array of players. We have 70 different categories. We have many touch points along the way, essentially production, import, export, wholesale, all the way through it. And all of those points need to be checked, data gathered, reconciled into one supply chain flow, which we call our through chain model, and therefore credibility of data ensured with that process.
Yep.
We talk to stakeholders in every category. We draw on all available sources of data, and I suppose take on the job of adding it all up, which we've gotten better at over the 6 years period, a little smoother at it. Doesn't mean that there aren't changes. This year particularly, there's been a lot of changes, and that's essentially the challenge of the job.
And I know, Martin, you take a bit of a focus on fresh. That's kind of the headline that's reported on there. So how does that relate to other forms of horticulture, for example, like dried or other processed volumes that you see come through?
Yeah, fresh is the dominant form, and that's where most of the value is generated in the large majority of categories. Now that doesn't that's excluded by, say, processed tomatoes or processed potatoes and so on. But the large majority of product flows through as fresh form. We've got up in the slide on the screen at the moment the flow of product, and that really profiles the different points that we gather data from and the different outputs and modelling assumptions that we have to make, and therefore create and furnish the content of the handbook. So yep. At every point, we sum up the total production, and then we would look to say, well, how much of that's exported, how much of it is processed, how much goes through to fresh market supply, how much fresh market is complemented by imports, and then in the last 2 years, that fresh market supply divided up into retail and food service.
And Martin, that last point there on retail and food service, as you said, that's a new addition now in the second year.
Yes.
Maybe, yeah, just run us through a little bit about the approach to discern the share of volume trading into those two channels.
Okay, the rationale for doing that was probably driven by food service remaining somewhat anonymous, difficult. It's lots of smaller players, but over the last 5 years, up until 2020, steadily increasing as prepared food picked up a higher share. So there was a need to understand it. In many cases, we're seeing more of the supply sector catering with products specifically aimed at food service. So we set out through Fresh Market and through setting up teams of providors to understand food service and reconcile what's going into the food service channels with what's going into retail. I mean, essentially, we're saying we had to find things at a fresh market supply. We then set out to split that, and this example category we've got up there, we're seeing that 14% of that is going through to food service and 83% through to retail. Now those numbers are, on average, overall fruit and veg, probably closer to maybe 18 to 20 to food service and about 80 to retail.
Mm. I know Brendan as well has looked into some of this, particularly we've seen in the last year for 2019-20 that movement in the share of trade to food service has been obviously disrupted somewhat. So we'll be sure to get to that when Brendan takes the floor later on. But that's really good to see. I suppose what we see on the screen is probably more of the simplified version. I know there's some extra considerations that you need to build in when modelling the nut category.
Yes.
How do you take what are some of the characteristics of the nut supply chain model?
The nuts have got a different pathway to market, essentially framed by having two product forms. So nuts can and are often sold in a kernel form or could be sold in an in-shell form. So we needed to accommodate that as well, because both of those forms realise different levels of value, and it was too simplistic to roll them all together. So for the half a dozen nut categories that we profile, that capacity was there where it was available, and we broke that out. Essentially really about a different product form flowing through to its end consumption and needing to identify and map that out.
Yeah, I think that's another advantage of the handbook, is recognising those unique product traits and then sort of controlling for those as needed, which is good to see, and no doubt the audience can get their heads around that when they look at the nut category. There's also been, I know, in the last 2 years, with now being the second iteration of this, but a movement to a dashboard interface that you've developed. So maybe you could just provide a brief overview of the functionality introduced through that interface.
Sure. Yeah, we're pretty pleased with that, and your team and yourself actually worked with us to make it happen. Look, it really put the rather complex nature of a 400 or 500 page PDF into an online accessible form. It meant that those that wanted to look specifically at one category could get there quicker. All the information is there. It readily and accessibly allows history to be plotted. And really, I think that's just today's information delivery was in that sort of form. And I think it's getting good patronage, or it has enjoyed that in the last year. And I hope that we see sort of more of that. So look, I guess we're an information business, and that's really standard fare now for what consumers of information are looking for. And I think it made the handbook more accessible. I think it also allowed those that are looking at parts of it to get to those parts easier and quicker, and those that wanted to look across could do so. But I think a lot of users are more specifically looking at their categories, and I think that's a big enabler of easier use all around, allowing that to happen.
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, one of the main advantages of that is just being able to view at a glance the entire time series that's available over the 8 years, where up until the previous PDF, we were, I suppose, quite fixed in the amount of space we could dedicate to that data. So, so that's been really good. And also for this year, I might add, we've further enhanced that by making that interface accessible from a mobile device as well, in addition to a desktop. So, yeah, I agree. It's been a really great win for the evolution of the handbook.
I think so. I think it has. One small point I missed here. I mean, the through chain model we talked about earlier reconciles all the way through to household consumption. So I guess we have good sources of information telling us about what's produced. It flows all the way through, and the retail side of it aligns with how much households buy and how frequently they purchase and so on. That's all underlying and behind all that. So it's quite a tight, I suppose, ledger that reconciles all that stuff, which gives us a lot of headaches at times, but we essentially have to make balance in order to make the whole thing work.
No, definitely. I think that's one of the main selling points of the resource compared to other forms of data, is that reconciliation across the entire supply chain, which is something like horticulture, just critical to make sure the numbers are reflective of what's happening on the ground. So
yeah, I think so. I think that's important, and with your support, we've been able to make that happen and continue to maintain it. I think the accuracy of it is everything.
Yep, no doubt. No, that's been great, Martin. Yeah, a good little overview there, and some considerations that that have come into the handbook over the last 6 editions now. So a good refresher for those on the line, just orientating themselves with the handbook and the resource that is now at their disposal. So we'll move now to part 2 of the session, where we're going to now take a look at the results that have been released for the 2019-20 period. And also undertake some trend analysis as well, in terms of what we've seen through the numbers. And we've got Brendan O'Keefe here as introduced before, but Brendan's been working very closely with Martin this year to compile and help produce this edition. And Brendan's going to take us through some of the key metrics. And yes, I might also add, while there's the depth of data here. So what you're going to see is a bit of a sample, bit of a teaser of what's possible through the handbook resource. So this will still, no doubt, give you a great taste of what's possible through the handbook. So Brendan, I might leave it to you now to take us through what you've been able to find.
Thanks, Adam. Yeah, so I'll be walking through some of the interesting results and also try to explain some of them too. This won't be too exhaustive, so if you're looking for any specific results, have a dive into the Tableau version online, which Martin was talking about. So horticulture value has grown for the 7th year in a row since we first have data available to reach $15 billion. This is the same amount of money that Pfizer expects from their COVID vaccine sales globally for 2021, which really puts that figure into perspective. There was good growth across the board as well. Fruit and vegetables both grew by 3%, nuts grew by 19%, and lifestyle, which is turf, nursery, and cut flowers, grew by 6%. So this was a very strange year with both demand side and supply side impacts. On the supply side, we had drought and bushfires really impacting production volumes, while bushfires also disrupted supply chains along with COVID, which made it very difficult to actually get some products to market, even when they were produced. On the demand side, COVID completely shut down the food service industry across the country for a few months. All fruit and vegetable lines send some of their products to food service, so this left a gap in demand. Retail picked up part of this slack in some cases, but this was sometimes in the form of panic buying, which caused volatility in prices and more stress on supply chains. So fruit and vegetables are what we call price inelastic. So demand only changes slightly when there is a change in price. This is what allows price to increase during periods of lower production, and consumers will still buy the product. So we can see this for plums, watermelons, cherries, and apples. They were hit hard by drought and bushfires, which lowered their production volumes. Higher prices, however, reduced this impact on production value. Cherries, for example, had a decrease of 33% in terms of production volume, so a really challenging year, but this translated to only a 5% reduction in production value. There was a similar story across some vegetable lines, with head lettuce and capsicum in particular receiving much higher prices and driving production value increases of around 20% despite lower production volumes. Must be noted, however, that this is a bit more of a nuanced story across industries and within industries. So while some growers may have received higher products for the product they're able to get to market, other growers may have been worse off as either their production decreased or they couldn't get their product to market due to interrupted supply chains. Some industries did expand, however, such as the 4 here. For these industries, maintaining prices as production volume increases is a really good outcome. So rubus and blueberries are a really positive story and have been the fastest growing hort industries over the past 5 years, more than doubling their production volume. During this time, prices have remained fairly consistent, leading to production value also more than doubling, further showing the price inelastic nature of some horticulture products. So we had some really unexpected industry-specific impacts from COVID. First of all, for sweet corn, there is currently a shortage due to increased demand in 2020 for canned sweet corn, which we saw flying off shelves earlier in the year, a lot of which is Australian grown. 55% of sweet corn is sent to processing, so we can see how much this demand can have a flow-on effect to all corn production. Therefore, we can expect another year of strong growth for sweet corn in 2021, as higher volumes will be sent to processing and lower volumes sent to the fresh market, further pushing up prices. Ginger was hit on the demand side through drought conditions, but on the demand side, COVID has led to record prices as people recognise the health benefits from ginger, making things like ginger tea. Demand for garlic has also been strong, with both local production and imports increasing in value. This is due to increased demand from households where there has been more cooking from scratch at home during lockdowns. There is still the opportunity to displace imports with local production, however, with 58% of fresh supply being sourced from imports. So looking at the lifestyle sector, there's been strong growth here as well. Nursery over-indexed its 3-year average rate last year, and through the Hort project NY17008 Nursery Industry Statistics, We know that this was driven by sales to retailers, which reflects an increase in demand from households. Turf was also a big winner from COVID, with people spending more on home improvements. Now on to export performance, which was a bit of a different story, remaining relatively stable, even throughout all the impacts. So overall, COVID didn't have a major impact on exports, maintaining the record value from 2019, which is a really good outcome. Total export value is up 2.5%, while volume remained the same. Fruit was up 11%. Nuts and vegetables were both down 6% on the back of reduced export volumes. For vegetables, this could be that more was sent to the domestic market where prices were really strong. This slide here shows the top 5 industries for exports as a share of total production volume. There has been a change to the graph on this slide due to an incorrect calculation for macadamias and almonds. For the top 3 industries listed here, we can see that exports are even more important to overall performance than the domestic market. Macadamias send the largest share to exports at 83%. Global demand for macadamias outstrips supply at present, so the industry is well placed to capitalise on this with industry expansion in the future. Table grapes are at 71%, an increase from 61% in 2013, showing that exports have always been historically important for this industry, but it has really allowed greater volumes to be produced while still receiving increasing prices. Almonds tell a similar story, with higher production volumes being soaked up by export markets. This will need to continue with the industry undergoing further expansion in the future. Mandarin export volume grew by 30% year on year to enter the top 5 this year, and even bumped down their bigger brother oranges to 5th. So as Martin said before, this is our second year of capturing food service and retail splits across each commodity, which is really good timing because we can compare these splits in 2020 with the relatively normal year in 2019 and see how things have changed. So overall, vegetables send more to the food service sector. We can see the top 5 food service industries for vegetables. This provides important strategic information to industries as well, such as for onions, who have decided to invest in educating the food service industry on the benefits of onions and hope to grow demand in this sector. So it's still an important market for some fruit commodities as well. We see the top 3 there with lemons and limes, avocados and persimmons. Melons were an interesting case where in 2019, they sent 20% to food service, but this decreased to 10% in 2020. Luckily, exports filled some of this gap, but it does show how some industries were majorly affected in 2020. And table grapes are just an interesting outlier, sending only 4% to food service, showing they were relatively shielded from impacts on the food service industry. So in summary, it was a pretty volatile year, but overall horticulture showed great resilience in terms of getting product to market and was well supported by consumers. Just through our little analysis and results I've shown today, we can see that the different structure of each industry and that each industry has its own story, which is possible to draw out from HortStats with the variety of data available. So let's hope and the next year we get some more good surprises, such as a small pip avocado. Back to you, Adam.
Thanks, Brendan. Yeah, that's been excellent and some really good perspectives there. I think yeah, some things that stand out for me. I suppose we've seen the demand for horticulture in a value sense just year on year increases really since we've started. But something for me that stands out is just the diversity across that mix. So in some years you'll have, say a weaker fruit production base, which might be then offset by a stronger nut production base and so on. So that diversity across the sector, I think has been a strength to help keep that growth trajectory going along. And yeah, just such an interesting year, I suppose, with, as you said, supply side impacts with drought and bushfires, obviously on those summer fruit crops. And then that's just sort of come up against the whole situation with the market around food service and the changing retail landscape there. So yeah, I think it's been a fascinating year really, and no doubt there's plenty of stories to come as we make our way through that data for 2019-20. So it's been excellent. Thank you very much. All right, so just take a bit of a breath there as we get our heads around all of those insights. But we'll now move to the panel session, which is the final part of the webinar. And what I wanted to do here today was to draw in some perspectives across a panel of industry stakeholders to understand some of the examples of how the data is being used and applied across these different groups within horticulture. So what I'm hoping to do here is just to illustrate again that depth across that use space. And I might also just also remind the audience as well that we do have that Q&A session as well that will follow our discussion with the panelists. So please put in any questions as they come to mind, either up until now or as we make our way through this session. So I'm joined by five stakeholders here today who are either active users of the handbook or have used the handbook in the past to support some of their work for horticulture. And we've got representation across a range of industry groups. So we've got people from the government, from grower representative groups. We've got consultants and also scientific researchers on board. But what I'll do to start with is we'll just go around the grounds, and I'll just move sort of left to right from my screen and ask for a brief introduction just about yourself and how you engage with the horticulture sector and hort innovation. So first on my screen, I've got Peter from ABARES. Peter, if you wouldn't mind just a brief intro, that'd be great. And
g'day, Adam. How you going? Hello, everybody.
Good.
Well, yeah, we work with hort innovation quite a bit, and I'm in ABARES at the Department of Agriculture, so we're the research arm of the department, and in that role, we supply advice to other parts of the department and the Minister's office. We also do research on different issues in the agriculture sector, and we put out our publication once every 3 months on the outlook for hort and other sectors of agriculture. So did you want me to go into how we use this stuff now, Adam, or that's a bit later?
We might get to that, Peter, as we make our way through, but that's been a good intro, just at least to understand the role you play. So thank you. Now Nicole from ABS.
Hi Adam, thanks. And hi everyone who's watching and listening today. My name's Nicole, so I'm from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. I've been working in the agricultural statistics section for a long time, probably about 15 years, across different parts of the surveys and how we collect data. But right now, I'm heading up a team that looks after the Value of Agricultural Commodities Produced survey, which I'll refer to as VACP, because it's just easier to say. And that's the process by where we collect, compile and publish estimates of gross and local values of production for major agricultural commodities in Australia. So it's quite a complex process, and I might talk a little bit about that later when we're talking about how we use the Hort Handbook. But our data is used by other ABS areas that produce national accounts by Commonwealth governments such as ABARES, state and territory governments and industry groups. So we've got quite a wide user base.
Great, thanks Nicole, that sounds really good. Now next we've got Michael from the Fresh Produce Alliance.
Thanks, Adam. So the Australian Fresh Produce Alliance is a relatively new industry association, working primarily with 13 large companies, but also working more broadly across industry on cross-cutting strategic issues generally. The Hort Statistics publication is really important for us in providing a consolidated set of data for the industry. There's a lot of good work being done by a range of industries and industry associations on the value of their individual products and lines. But the Hort Statistics Handbook has brought that together and continues to do that, and starting to give us a bit of a time series. So it's very useful in engaging with government, with the broader community, and of course, from our perspective, helping to provide an evidence base to build research on and policy, both through Hort innovation, but also more broadly. So thank you.
Excellent. That's great, Michael. Thank you. And next we've got Andrew from EY.
Hi, Adam. How are you? Yes, we at EY, we do work right across the ag sector and the Hort sector. And whether that's for the likes of Hort Innovation or government, industry bodies, or industry itself, or individual corporations or businesses. And it's really covering a range of issues, whether that's policy or governance in a government setting, or whether it's productivity and growth or digital and innovation. We work right across a range of spectrum of issues.
Thanks very much. And finally, we've got James from Caesar.
Yeah, I'm a research scientist at Caesar Australia, a research provider on several recent Hort investments surrounding biosecurity preparedness, so including spotted wing Drosophila, a number of vegetable leaf miners, and then outside of Hort, we do work on other biosecurity threats like fall armyworm, Russian wheat aphid, spotted lanternfly, and so on.
Excellent. Thanks, James. I'm keen to hear how you've been using the handbook as we go through. But that's been great just to get some perspectives there. And again, such a diverse group of people here on the line. So fantastic to have this experience on the session today. So what I'm going to do now is just maybe unpack a little bit more in detail how you've been engaging with the handbook in particular. And I know we've got a bit of a teaser from those introductions, but we might unpack that a little bit more. And I'll go maybe through that same order and just use this as an opportunity, I suppose, just to understand exactly how the handbook is supporting your activities. So Peter, I know you were speaking about the work you do in the agricultural commodities space, and that's no doubt coming up soon with the Outlook Forum in March. But yeah, this just be great to hear how you engage with the handbook in your work.
We're big users of your data and the ABS data, but what we find really useful about the handbook is that there's often industries in which there's something interesting happening, or you want to investigate some particular issue, and in the ABS data it's hidden away in the other section. And so the Hort Innovation book goes down a bit finer into a lot of these smaller industries, and that's a major thing of value for us in the handbook. The other thing we find useful is how you sort of put it into like the supply chains of the industry and different flows and that sort of thing. And we find that's particularly useful when we're providing advice to other parts of the department and ministers, because they're often interested in flows through supply chains and that sort of thing. And I suppose, when we looking at something interesting happening in the industry, you can't always get what we want from the ABS data because it's too aggregated, and this allows us to dig down into that a lot more than what would be possible otherwise. They're the main ways that we aggregate with the handbook. It's over 1,000 different purposes, of course, but in terms of, it always comes back to those kinds of issues in how we engage with the handbook.
No, that's great, and I think I agree. Granularity was something there with that really hasn't been afforded to the sector before. And I know you work across a number of commodities, but you mentioned the supply chain view. Are there any other comparable supply chain views across agri, or is this somewhat unique to horticulture in your experience?
You mean the information you've got in your
like the way handbook? It's mapped up.
Actually, I'm just trying to think. No, the way you do it is the way you do it in a nice compact way like that is pretty unique.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's good. Just wasn't sure if you were aware of any other. But yeah, as I said sort of before, it's quite unique to horticulture, some of those supply chain considerations. So, that's good to know. Thank you. Now,
all
Nicole,
the things you said in your introduction that as to why you went in to produce the handbook. A lot of those things is what we find valuable in using it in our everyday work.
Excellent. Good to know. Now, Nicole, so value of agricultural commodities produced. I'm quite familiar with this data set myself, and it's been something we also obviously work with ABS data as well. So I suppose it's a bit of a complementary, sort of sharing there, I suppose, across those data sets. But yeah, be really interested to understand how you consider some of the handbook inputs into your work.
Sure, thanks, Adam. Just for the benefit of people listening, if you're not familiar with the VACP, I might just explain a little bit how we compile it. So stay with me just for a couple of seconds. As Adam's mentioned, and I know I don't have to preach this to this audience, but horticulture in Australia is quite complex. There's a lot of stuff grown in a lot of different places and sold in a lot of different markets. So we compile our value statistics on agricultural commodities in a couple of different ways. We source information from ABS surveys. So you'd be probably familiar with a couple of surveys that we do annually around production amounts from agriculture. So we use that information, but we also source non-ABS data, so from marketing authorities and industry sources. And we also send out surveys ourselves to a number of, I guess, just broadly call them buyers of agricultural produce that come from the farmer themselves. And it's at that point where we price it. So given the number of information sources we have, we compile all of that. And then we need to find industry and market data that's up to date and comprehensive so that we can compare our figures and understand what's happening in the industry. So when the opportunity to speak on this panel came up, my team were very quick to remind me how important the horticulture handbook was for us. So they gave me 3 main points that they wanted me to mention. So the handbook helps us understand, I guess, the market share between fresh, processed and exported fruit and vegetables, which we don't collect directly. We do source it from other places and have a look at, but the handbook's one of those, I guess it's a trusted source for us to provide that breakdown. And it provides a percentage split between the 3 different markets that help us understand where Australian agricultural commodities are sold. It also provides us another source of information around what's being grown on Australian farms. We price what we call the major commodities for horticulture, so we don't capture everything, but the handbook gives us an idea of what emerging markets there might be, what's grown more or less in a particular year, and just gives us a broader perspective, I guess. And also provides another confrontation source for us around the production figures, so the amount of a particular commodity grown. But most importantly, I think, because VACP produces a price for a commodity for a 12-month period, the handbook helps us understand seasonality. So where the handbook provides a breakdown of high, low, and medium availability of a commodity, we use that information to help us calculate the gross unit value for a specific month, which we then use to produce our final estimate. So the handbook is critical for us, and each year we look forward to it coming out because we can have a look and see what's going on. And as you mentioned, Adam, I guess there's a bit of sharing and comparison between what we do, and that kind of relationship we also value. So it's the relationship we have with you guys, but also the handbook that comes out.
Oh, well, yeah, thanks, Nicole, for those perspectives. It's really insightful for the audience, no doubt. A little bit more around the approach you take, but some of the considerations from your level, and I think it's really great, taking on board as much as you can and keeping as many as many avenues open to get the best set of data that you publish. So I think there's been instances where we've also worked with the ABS data more probably at a regional level, given the depth that's possible through your material there. So no, that's been really good. Thank you. Now, Michael, so you did give a bit of a brief overview of some of the application and consideration you've given the handbook over the years, but perhaps if there's a particular example or a use case where the handbook has been drawn on, you know, in your work, if there's something there that you could talk to, that might be an interesting point of discussion, just to hear from you on.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe if we just talk through media, I mean, often people looking to run a story, whether it's on export or workforce or whatever the issue might be at a particular point in time. And the Hort statistics, similar to the previous panelists, Hort statistics provides an evidence base. So it can provide the facts and figures and really, you know, provide some evidence to whatever story is running. So we often refer people or send through pieces of data out of Hort statistics. Even simple things like the maps. Again, you know, the industry bodies have compiled these over many years, but having them in one place allows a journalist to look at, you know, blueberries and citrus and vegetables in a particular region or across the state, and build a very quick understanding of our sector on an angle they're exploring. So, you know, I think from my perspective, it has allowed us and continues to allow us to present our sector in a better way. The value of it, the increasing sophistication within our sector, and obviously the growth prospects. And, you know, that'd be one suggestion. And the methodology is continuing to be refined. In future years, it'd be great to present some of the data in a timeline way, not necessarily all the way through the report, but just to help reinforce some of those key opportunities for our sector. And as I say, it'll allow us to leverage, for example, just using the media, it'll allow us to leverage that data in a really practical way to say, here's the value, here's the growth over time. And then, you know, even potentially based on that timeline now over 5 or 6 years, this is what we might expect in the future. So yeah, I think that's probably a pretty specific example. Yeah, I mean, we can go through other, you know, it's replicated amongst state officials and that sort of thing in the development of policy. If they're not familiar with horticulture, scanning through the document is a very simple way to better understand the horticulture in their state, the regionality of it, and the relative size of individual products. Because our industry is so large and complex, it's sometimes hard to understand the relative size of different industries. So yeah, I again reinforce that as a baseline evidence base for all of us in whatever application we're doing. I think it's, you know, it's playing a very critical role.
Thanks, Michael. That's great, and yeah, some good reflections there on where we might be able to take it to, particularly building that understanding as more and more interest in the horticulture sector, you know, emerges, which is a great thing. So really good. Thank you. Now, Andrew from EY. I know you might have a great use case study for us to learn from here. You've been doing some work in labour.
Yeah, I might let everyone else be the judge whether it's a great one. We think it is. We've actually used the HortStats handbook on a number of occasions, but particularly on our recent work with labour. As you know, everyone on this call will no doubt know, you know, the impact of the global pandemic and Australia's response to that. Obviously, it was rapid and it focused on protecting health, but unfortunately, a lot of the measures also had a pretty significant impact on labour markets, and particularly seasonal labour markets. So when you think about how, you know, the impact of international border closures or measures such as JobKeeper or JobSeeker or the subsequent internal border closures, they all had quite a disruptive effect on what was a pretty traditional sort of labour market. And there was really no single picture of how that market worked and where or how the impacts may eventuate and how big they were. So really what we were trying to do was establish a national picture and understand labour demand and supply and where any shortfall might occur. And so fundamentally that included a forecast. So we knew we had a bunch of data. We knew we had to also speak with growers and industry, but we were really searching for a national data set that we could use to underpin our work. And the Hortstats Handbook was fundamental to doing that. It really provided a national view, but as others have said, it provided a really useful regional picture, and obviously covered the commodities really, really well. So that allowed us to triangulate all of the data sets that we had and to really deeply understand how the labour market was operating. It was generally the most accurate and up-to-date data sets available, and so our observations were that major changes in industry, whether that's investment in production or other changes, generally were better reflected in the Hortstats Handbook than many other data sets. So it was really up to date. We were able to use the trend information because of the multiple years here that this has been running for, to get a really good picture and triangulate that with what we knew was going on in industry. And so that was fundamental to trying to predict what was going to happen next, and not just assume that it was what was happening before. And it also enabled us to quickly identify where the most material pockets of labour were, either by commodity or location. So we were able to quickly focus our attention on those material areas. And finally, I'd say, we would not have been able to respond as quickly as we did in the project were that data not available to us on day one of our project. We were able to pick it up and run with it and have confidence in the data set from day one. So there's lots of benefits from it. Obviously that allowed industry to respond faster, in a very different labour market, but also hopefully bring other players together around solving that labour challenges.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. No, thanks, Andrew. And yeah, it's nice when I suppose the output from your work is aligned to that headline data as well. It's all sort of playing its role across the various applications, which was really good to see that being used for that purpose, which was great. Now, James, finally, so bringing in a bit of a scientific perspective to some of this discussion. You've mentioned before, the work on biosecurity preparedness. I know you've been doing some interesting work with the handbook, so it'd be great to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I guess I just want to echo a lot of the sentiments said by some of the other speakers. Peter and Andrew sort of commented on the granularity of the resource, which we also find exceptional, but also it's just useful in, I guess, triangulating with other data sets like the ABS, which may have a finer spatial resolution. So it's just useful to, I guess, triangulate. But I guess more generally, we're really, I guess, a research and extension organization, and to really ensure that our outputs are delivering a high return on investment for industry, we need good industry data. And so I think that's really what the handbook can provide first and foremost. So for instance, I mentioned that we work a lot in biosecurity preparedness programs, so delivering, for example, contingency plans for industry, so that our responses are effective, and that we are mitigating the risks to reduce the chances of incursions of new biosecurity threats. So we need good data for that. Some of the data that we've used, for example, are the location and the value of commodity production areas, as I mentioned, but that's really useful for overlaying with our sort of research on the predicted establishment and spread risks of these novel pests that we don't necessarily have in the country. So that's sort of the research side, but on the extension side, to really ensure good bang for our buck, we need to be targeting those areas that are at highest risk and where risk mitigation strategies are in highest need. So having that good data on the location and the value of these affected production regions really helps us tailor our extension activities to maximum effect. When we develop tools, I know Nicole mentioned that seasonality data was really useful to her. It's really useful for us too, in producing, I guess, risk assessment tools for the potential seasonal impact of these novel pests. You may want to overlay you know, what the pest is doing with what the crops are doing, and that's going to change through time for both the pest and the particular commodity too. So being able to sort of get that temporal dimension too in our sort of predictive work and our impact analysis is really useful.
No, that's great, James. That's yeah, some of those risk assessment tools that you've been able to build there. That sound it's good that you've been able to draw on the data to help substantiate those, and a few themes, yeah, coming out there on particularly granularity, seasonality, timeliness of the data, and reflective of the market conditions. I think there's also some things that I've noted from each of your perspectives there. So that's been really good, and maybe just a general question before we go to Q&A, but maybe one just for any tips and tricks or anything that you sort of focus on when you're going into the data. How do you actually approach your dissection of that data set, because there is so much to get around. So maybe just an open question to anyone that wants to have a crack at that. But yeah, any tips or tricks for how you approach the use?
From our perspective, the tables at the front providing the summary are very useful. So if you're looking for overall category numbers, both production and value or export, you can very quickly see. And then this is where I think the timeline would be useful, because if you could see the trend in those tables as well, or at the front, it would then you go to the specific you know, section on a product, for example. So yeah, so I find those tables very useful at the front, and often, you know, just grab data from there.
Yep. Oh, good to know. Thanks, Michael.
Yeah, what I would say, one of the things we do is we really try to seek to understand the nature of the data set. You know, even before we decide to use a data set, we really want to understand where it comes from, how it's sourced, the level of quality, and you know, what it's based on. And so yeah, that's generally one of the first things that we look at, you know, before we decide to use any data set.
Definitely. No, that's good.
The comment on the new dashboard, it's found it pretty handy for jumping between different commodities sort of quickly, versus the PDF where you'd have to scroll up and down or flick through it if you've got a printed copy. It's just a bit easier for jumping around.
Yep. No, definitely good to know. And
I'd probably echo that. I think the dashboard is a real help for us. Usually we approach the handbook with specific questions. So we'll go in paging through looking for particular things, but the dashboard gives us a really good overview and ability to drill down really quickly.
Excellent. Thanks, Nicole. All right. Well, let's we'll leave that session there. And yeah, thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives with us here today. It's no doubt enriched the value of this session and the learnings that we have around the range of use cases for the data. So really value the participation here. And I might then use that as a bit of a segue. We do have a few minutes left for some general audience Q&A. And there has been quite a few questions submitted, which has been encouraging. And I might kick off a bit of a question here. We've had a question coming, I'd probably best answered from Martin. Someone's asking for a little bit more detail on the consumer metric side of the equation. So how do you approach the consumer metric triangulation?
Okay, we run a food panel, and out of that food panel, we assess the quantity of trips that consumers will make annually in a category by households across Australia. We will define the quantity that they buy on those trips, and that quantity will reconcile with the retail total market size. So if, for instance, if we have a retail market of 50,000 tonnes, what we do will reconcile that volume with the frequency of trips and the quantity that they purchase, which means that it's got a sense check for that, and that so we're not stabbing at numbers or unrealistic numbers. And when you're doing that across 60 or 70 categories, there is a good level of learning from I suppose the metrics and other categories, and you're going to stay within sense checks and boundaries. And for instance, bananas, the penetration would be 95%. The purchase quantities around about 900 grams, and the average households are buying it, I think, just short of 50 times a year, just short of once a week. And that extrapolated out by the occupied households in Australia. Important that it's only the occupied households, because unoccupied ones don't buy a lot of food, extends out to the retail market size. Now, I'm sure that Andrew's sitting there adding all that up going, yep, I can understand how that works. That's a tough net, a safety check for us to reconcile the largest channel. And we set ourselves that so that that's really the anchor for our accuracy. Food service is more difficult, but if we've got retail right, by default, food service ends up defining itself. And then we have a team of providors that give us help with what the sales mix is.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, sense? Martin. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. Thank you. Okay. A question for Brendan, I think. Any perspectives on how horticulture compares to the wider agriculture sector? That was a question that came through there.
Yeah, so total horticulture value is around the 65 to 70 billion mark. So we can see that horticulture is kind of just under 20% of that total value, and that share has been increasing over the last 5 to 10 years. We can see horticulture, we're quite lucky, even though we had a tough year, value still increased, whereas other industries, if they have a tough year, they can really see large decreases in value. So yeah, we're quite lucky in horticulture. I think it's the diversity being produced right across Australia in a variety of conditions really helps the industry have kind of inbuilt resilience to shocks that we've seen in the past year. So horticulture has been performing quite well in a total ag context.
Mm-hmm. No, that's good to know. Thanks, Brendan. And yeah, doing very well. And probably time for one last question. There was a question here asking about how the data can be used by industries and growers. And I might have a crack at that, and feel free, Brendan or Martin or anyone on the panel, if they wanted to chip in here. But really, as I suppose we heard a little bit of that answer from Michael, and the application of that data in sort of serving as that evidence base for pursuing whatever issue or interest area facing your particular industry or growing context is. So that would be, I suppose, one immediate use case. And I think another great instance for that is it really helps to validate the trends over time. So that can then come into, potentially serving as a decision tool in your farm business planning decisions as well. So understanding the state of play of the market you're growing into and the relative share of production going to trade versus into the retail or food service channels. But yeah, there's many applications for how it can be used at a specific industry or growing level. I don't know, Brendan, if you wanted to expand on that at all, or it's probably the most of it, to be honest.
Yeah, that sounds exhaustive, Adam.
Yep, no, that's great. Awesome. Well, just conscious of time now coming up to the hour. So I think with that we'll call it a wrap, and let everyone get on with the rest of their day. But before we wrap up, again, I'd just like to thank the participants, Brendan, Martin, and to the wider panel that joined us for the back end of that session. Thanks again for sharing your perspectives and your insights to the audience around the country. It's been fascinating to hear all the different stories and examples of the way the handbooks has enriched your areas of work. So we really appreciate you coming online with us today. And I'll also add the handbook is, of course, accessible from the Hort Innovation website, and it is mobile friendly now as well. So feel free to bring it up on your mobile and take a look through what we've come up with. This session's been recorded, so it will be available online afterwards. And any of the Q&A questions submitted that we weren't able to answer, we're going to submit our answers online, and they'll be available for viewing there as well. So thanks again for being with us here today and taking time out of your day to learn a bit more about the handbook and the 2019-20 year. And we hope that you enjoy working with the handbook over the next year to come. So all the best, and speak soon.